After wishing you Shavua Tov, today's daf is daf Chavav. We're going to start here on Chav Hey Amud Beis, approximately 10 lines up before the end of the Amud. And we're talking about a case where a person saw a group of people that were eating up his food, his te'enim, and he put a whammy on them, he put a shvua, a neder on them, and then he finds out that amongst the group is his father, his brother. So there's a certain element of shkaga here. And in our Mishnah here in Masechet Nedarim, we have a principle called Neder Shehutar Miktsaso Hutar Kulo. And that's going to be the subject of machlokas between Beis Hillel and Beit Shammai. And the exact scope of that machlokas is going to be itself the issue here in our sugya. But first, the Gemara is going to quote a parallel Mishnah from later on in Masechet Nedarim on Daf Samach Vav, Tanan Hasam. So the Mishnah there is talking about a case of a person who took a neder that he won't eat meat for a period of 30 days. And he had a momentary lapse in which he forgot that on Shabbos there's a mitzvah to eat meat. So poskin lo b'shabbosos v'yom tovim, we're going to find a heter through a chacham. What's called a chacham is to be matir, but in this case, he'll be matir only part of the neder, not the entire neder. So he'll be matir him to eat basar on Shabbosos and Yom Tovim. And Brishona Hayu Omrim, the original position of the chachamim in this case was that Osam Yomim Mutarim Bachara Yomim Asurim. Although the chacham was matir part of the neder, as far as Shabbos and Yom Tovim, the rest of the neder, the balance of the neder remains valid, and he's not allowed to eat meat for the weekdays. Yimei Achol. Until Rabbi Akiva taught that neder shehuta miktsasa huta klua. Rabbi Akiva reflects the Shita Beis Hillel in our Mishnah that since they removed part of the neder, the entire neder is not chal. And that can be understood in one of two ways. Either it means that his das was for the entire neder, so if he's only getting half the neder, then he didn't have das neder, and we need echad v'pechad b'lev, or it might be something else, that the haflas peh, the lashon neder itself cannot be chal, in this case, once we remove half the neder. So we have now an equation between the Shita of Rabbi Akiva and the Shita of Beis Hillel. The Shita of Rabbi Akiva later on at Daf Samach Vav, and the Shita of Rabbi Akiva and the Shita of Beis Hillel right here on Daf Chav Hey. And now what the Gemara is going to try to do here, first according to Rabbah and then according to Rava, each with their own respective Shita, is to define the scope of this machlokes between Chacham and Rabbi Akiva, between Beis Hillel and Beit Shammai. Omar Rabbah. Now the principle of Rabbah, as we'll see it develop, is called Ma'amid Dvarav Harishonim, which means that when he comes in front of the Chacham to be matir his neder, when he finds out that part of the neder is unacceptable to him, does he reiterate the original neder, but just he removes his father, let's say, from the neder, or the Yom Tov, the Shabbos from the neder, or does he reformulate his neder and regret the entire neder? Says Rabbah, the Kuli Alma, even Beis Hillel will be modeh that Kol Hecha Di Omar, if after he had taken his neder, he clarifies that his father or his brother is amongst those upon which he took the neder, and he declares, Ilu Hayisi Odea Sha'ava Beinechem Hayisi Omer. Here's what I would have said if I knew that my father was amongst them. Kulchem Asurim Chutz Me'ava. Everyone is asur on this neder, with the exception of my father. And I would just add to the original neder the words chutz me'aba. I'm not changing my original neder. The original formulation, the neder, remains as is, namely kulchem asurim. That's how he said it originally. That's how he still says it now. when he finds out that his father was amongst those in that group, the kulon asurin v'aviv mutar. In this case, even Beis Hillel would agree that we do not apply the principle of neder shehuta miktsasa to kulo, because as far as the balance of the people in that group, other than his father, there's no difference. It's identical. The original formulation of the neder and the neder as he formulates it now, when he finds out that his father was amongst the group, he always takes the neder b'lashon kulchem asurim. Even now, when he discovers, to his surprise, that his father was in the group, he is still taking the same neder, so to speak, or shall we say, he's reaffirming his original formulation of the neder, namely kulchem asurim. And therefore, it's not a neder shehuta miktsasa. All he's doing really right now is he wants to remove his father from the neder. And he wants to say, chutz mi'aba, that my father was never included in the original neder. When I said kulchem asurim, what I really meant was kulchem asurim with the exception of my father. So it's the same exact identical neder that he took originally. And he's reaffirming his neder. He's just saying that my father was not in the neder. So he takes his father out of the neder, as if to say that my father was never included in the neder from the beginning, because as far as the balance of the people, as we said before, it's Mamid Dvarav Harishonim. He is reaffirming his original formulation, namely Kulchem Asurim. So then in what case, asks Rabbah, does Beis Hillel formulate his new principle, which Beit Shammai reject, of Neder Shehuta Miktsasa Huta Kulo, Lo Nechleku Elavi Omer, when now that he finds out his father was amongst the group, Ilu Hayisi Odeh Shaba Beinechem, if I would have known that my father was amongst the group, Hayisi Omer, I would have taken the neder in a different language, in a different formulation entirely. I would have said, Ploni, you Ploni Asurim. Reuven and Shimon, who are not related to me, are Asurim. But Abba Mutter, my father is Mutter. So it means I would have changed my nusach, I would have changed my original formulation of the neder, my lashon neder. I would have said Ploni, you Ploni, to isolate and single out those in the group that I want the neder to be chal upon, but not my father. So in such a case, his father was really part of the original neder. Why? Because in the original neder, he is specifying all the people, all the faces in that group, including his father. Now he finds out that one of the faces, one of the anonymous people in the group that he didn't identify is in truth his father. So now he's taking his father out of the original neder. He's not reformulating his original neder, but rather he's replacing his original neder. And in this case, Beis Hillel classify and define this as neder shehuta miktsasa. Why? Because his father, who was originally a part and parcel of the neder, is now being removed from the neder. And Beis Hillel hold that once you're removing someone from the original neder, the neder entirely collapses. It's huta miktsasa, huta kula. Beit Shammai, on the other hand, hold that even though the neder was huta b'miktsasa, nevertheless, we're going to be mad to that part of the neder. He made a mistake with regard to his father, but vis-a-vis the balance of the people that he wanted to prohibit, he had no mistake whatsoever. The neder still stands valid as it is. So that's going to be the machlokes between Beis Hillel and Beit Shammai, according to Rabbah. But Rabbah restricts the scope of this machlokes, and in a case where he is mamid dvarav harishonim and he reiterates his original formulation of the neder, namely kulchem asurim, but just he makes one change and he says chutz me'ava, then what he's saying is that my father is not included in the kulchem, which means that the neder was never chal to begin with vis-a-vis my father, and therefore it's not a huta miktsasa. The Ritva has a slightly different approach to this sugya. What we've presented until now is the Ran's approach. And the Ritva says that the difference that Rabbah is making here is not between Mamid Dvar Harishonim and not Mamid Dvar Harishonim, but rather his distinction is between a case where a person's prohibition and his Lashon Neder was a Lashon Klal, as opposed to a Lashon Prat. If from the beginning he employed a Lashon of an Isser of Klal, and then he finds out later that his father was in the Klal, then basically through his toes, it becomes clear now what we didn't know originally, that his father was not part of the klal. And therefore, the neder is not hutu b'miktsasa. But if the original formulation was b'lashon prat, in which case he intended to single out each person who would be included in the neder, and then even someone who later on, as it would be clear, he would find out that he's his father, then that prat would be batal. And since he took a neder b'lashon prat, and he included his father in the neder, now he's removing his father from the neder, that's called batal miktsasa batal kula. And that's the Ritva's shita. And now we start the daf for today, daf chavav, and we go on to Rava's shita. Disagreeing with Rav. Rava Amar Dekuli Alma, whether it's Beis Hillel, Beit Shammai, Kol Hecha Di Amar, in a case where he finds out that his father was amongst the group and he had made a toast in his original neder, and now he declares, Ilu Ayisi Odei Ashaba Beinehem, had I known that my father was amongst the group, I never would have said Kulchem Asurim. Vayisi Omer Ploni Uploni Asurim, the Abba Mutar. In such a case, even Beit Shammai would agree to Beis Hillel that Neder Shehuta Miktsasa Huta Kula V'Kula Mutarin. And the reason for this is because since now he's saying that if he had known that his father was then, he would change his language. He would have specified the individuals and said Ploni Uploni, and then he would have excluded his father. So that means that his father was included in the original neder, and now he's removing his father from the neder. And clearly, in such a case, even Beis Hillel would say huta miktsasa huta kulo. So we see that according to Rava's approach, as opposed to Rava, Rava was whittling down Beis Hillel. In which case he was coming up with a situation of Ma'amid Dvar Rishonim, or where he mentioned the klal, and even Beis Hillel would agree that huter miktsasa lo huter b'chlola. But now going to Rava, and Rava is saying quite to the contrary, that there's a case in which he's machlid tvarav, in which even Beis Shammai would agree that huter miktsaso, huter kula. Lo nechleku, where does Beit Shammai disagree with Beis Hillel? Elabi Omer, when he finds out that his father was in the group, and he declares, Ilu ayisi odeh sha'aba beinechem, had I realized that my father was amongst the group, I would have changed the original language of my neder. Hayisi Omer, I would have said the exact same language and reiterate my original neder, kuchem asurim, but I would have just said and added the words chutz me'aba. And here is going to be the machlokas between Beis Hillel and Beit Shammai. And the machlokas between Beis Hillel and Beit Shammai now takes on a whole new meaning, totally different than that of Rava's understanding, because now both Beis Hillel and Beit Shammai are on the same turf. They both agree fundamentally to accept the principle huta miktsasa huta kulo, but they're going to be arguing about a machlokes of tfos lashon rishon or bigmar dvarav adam nitfas. Let's explain. Do we go and put the emphasis on a person's original language, the beginning of his formulation? He said, kulchem asurim. So now he's saying, when he finds out that his father was amongst the group, he's reiterating kulchem asurim. And with these words, he's being mamid dvarav harishonim. He's not rejecting his original formulation and rescinding it. And therefore, this is not a case of neder shehuta miktsasa, because in every situation where he's mamid dvarav harishonim, then we don't say huta miktsasa, huta kula, because the original language is still valid even after he discovers his father was in the group. So he's really certifying his original neder, and therefore, according to Beis Shammai, who's going basar, what we call tfos lashon rishon, his lashon rishon was kulchem, he is reiterating and reaffirming his original neder, and that's called ma'amid dvar v'rishonim, and therefore the neder is chal. In miktaso, meaning. However, there's another possibility, and that is sof dvarav. At the sof dvarav, he adds chutz me'aba now that he realizes his father was in the group. And by adding chutz me'aba, he's really changing and rejecting his original formulation. And therefore, the original neder now becomes hutu b'miktaso, and in that case, theoretically, Beis Shammai would also agree that hutu kulo, just as Beis Shammai holds that as linin basa tchilas dvaro. Now, this issue as to whether or not we go basa tchilas dvaro, and the emphasis is on the beginning of a sentence or on the end of a sentence, is a machlokes in the Gemara in Masechet Tmura. And they argue about a case of a person who said, Harezu Tmuras Ola, Tmuras Shlomin. Rabbi Meir holds Tfos Lashon Rishon, and it's a Tmuras Ola. And Rabbi Yossi says, no, Al Gmar Dvarvu Nitfas, and therefore it's Tmuras Shlomin. And this is the Mishnah Masechet Tmura Daf Chaf Heyamid Beis, which is being quoted now. And Beit Shammai is going to be matched up with Rabbi Meir, and Beis Hillel with Rabbi Yossi. Beit Shammai Savrila Ki Rabbi Meir Di Omar Tfos Lashon Rishon. We see clearly that Rabbi Meir's sheet of Tfos Lashon Rishon is not limited to Tmura, but rather it's a universal halacha that applies in Kol Torah Kula whenever he begins on one leg and then ends with a lashon on a different leg. And we start with the Ikar Dvarav is what he meant at the very beginning, not what he rescinds and changes at the end. So even though here in this case, when he says that Ilu Ayisi Odeh Shabbat Beinechem is Hayisi Omer Kulchem Asurim Chutz Me'aba, there's no stira here between Tchilas Dvarav and Sof Dvarav, both are correct, Kulchem Asurim and Chutz Me'aba. So it's not exactly like the case of Tmuras Ola, Tmuras Shlamim, where it's got to be one or the other. Nevertheless, the question is, where's the Ikar Dvarav Shal Adam? Do we put the emphasis on his Tchilas Dvarav or on Sof Dvarav? And since Rabbi Meir holds Tfos Lashon Rishon, and Beit Shammai accepted that principle of Beit Shammai, so in this case, since he is reiterating and reaffirming his original neder, he's not undermining his neder through that Taras Nedarim of Shkog when he finds out that his father was in the group. He's saying again, Kulchem Asurim. Even now I want to say Kulchem Asurim. So he's Mamshich Dvarav, and the original neder is Chal. And therefore there's no Hutu Miksasu to Kula. Beis Hill Savri, Ki Rabbi Yossi, the Omer B'Gmar Dvarav Adam Nitfas, that we put the emphasis on the end of a person's statement when he contradicts himself. And here, the emphasis here is when he says Chutz Me'aba. And when he says Chutz Me'aba, he's really changing his original formulation of the neder, and therefore becomes neder shehuta miktaso, memela is huta kula. Because holchenach sof dvarav, ikar dvarav shel adam sof dvarav, and therefore, when there's a conflict and we have to decide between tchilas dvarav and sof dvarav, we go after sof dvarav. Here too, even though there's no stira between tchilas dvarav and sof dvarav, as we said before, they're both correct, but nevertheless, the ikar dibur shel adam is sof dvarav. And for sof dvarav, he says chutz me'aba. So what he means by chutz me'aba is he's changing the original formulation. It's not kulchem. I'm taking my abba out of the group, and therefore I apply the principle according to Beis Hillel, based on standing on the shoulders of Rabbi Yossi, huta miktsasa huta kula. Eis ve'rav popular rav. All right. Now, we mentioned earlier the Mishnah on Daf Samach Vav, later on in the Mishnah Masechta, that records the sheet of Rabbi Akiva, like Beis Hill, that neder shehuta miktsasa huta kula. And now the Gemara is quoting more of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva himself goes into greater detail about the principle of Huta Miktasu Huta Kulo. The Rabbanan rejected that. And the Mishnah is going to tell us that in a certain scenario, even Rabbi Akiva's Huta Miktasu doesn't apply. Ketzah. In other words, what is the scope of Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Akiva Neder Huta Miktasu Huta Kulo? When does it apply and when does it not apply? It applies if he says konam sheini nene lekulchem, and after prohibiting everyone from getting anah in a konam and a neder, hutar echad mihem, the chacham was matir one of them, or for example, let's say it became clear that one of them was his father, and he never intended to take the konam. So in those cases, Rabbi Akiva applies the principle of Huta Miktsasa, Huta Kula. However, if instead of saying Konam Sheni Nene Lekulchem, he declared She'eni Nene Lola Zeh V'Lola Zeh, so he mentioned each person sequentially. Reuven should be Asur, Shimon should be Asur, etc., etc. Says Rabbi Akiva, in such a case, Huta Rishon Huta Kula. Here too, since we're talking about a konam on two people, if he removes one of them, he's left with half of the original neder. However, Rabbi Akiva qualifies and he says the following. In the sequence, he started with Reuven and then he went to Shimon in his original formulation of the neder. He was matir, the Rishon Reuven. What happens if he's matir the Achron? So he said that if he was matir Reuven, then the neder, so to speak, collapses. Why? Because Shimon comes after Reuven. And if the neder is not chal vis-a-vis Reuven because he was matirid, or he didn't know that Reuven, that anonymous Reuven was his father, then the neder collapses, huter kulo, and Rabbi Akiva applies that principle. This is called, by the way, we'll soon see, the seifa of the Reisha. Meaning, the Reisha encompasses two cases in which Rabbi Akiva will apply the principle of Huta Miktsas Huta Kulo, either in a case where he declared Kulchem, or in a case where he declared Echad Zeh v'Echad Zeh, and then he was Mata the Rishon. That's called Lazel Lazeh. However, now we get to the Seifa. And this is going to be the case where even Rabbi Akiva will still validate the original neder. And now he's going to be matir, not Reuven, but Shimon. Says Rabbi Akiva, Hutar Achron, Ha'achron mutar, v'kulan asurim. This is Rabbi Akiva's breakthrough here, that he wants to say that he can chip off and remove the end of the neder without undermining and invalidating the beginning of the neder. So he takes Shimon out of the picture, but the neder remains valid as far as the balance of the people, Reuven. Again, I gave a case of Reuven and Shimon. Let's say it was Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, and he was matir the neder for Yehuda, then Reuven, Shimon, and Levi remain asur in the neder. And we're only matir Yehuda and no one else but Yehuda. Now, from this Mishnah, it would seem that whether you're talking about the Reisha or the Reisha of the Seifa, where we said that Hutar Echad Mehem Hutar Kulam, or Hutar Rishon Hutar Kulam, This is Rabbi Akiva's unique shita, like Beis Hillel, that huta miktaso to kula. The Rabbanan, therefore, who rejected Rabbi Akiva, they all like Beit Shammai of our Mishnah, and lo huta kulo, because the Mishnah says Ketzad Rabbi Akiva, implying that this is Rabbi Akiva's unique shita, and that Chacham and the Rabbanan never accepted. And now the Gemara is going to work out the pshat in this Mishnah according to Rabbah and raise a question and objection on Rav. Bishlema l'Rabbah, if we're going to accept Rabbah's shita, that Beit Shammai Beis Hillel had a fundamental machlokes in a case of a person who changes his original formulation as to whether or not we apply huta miktaso huta kulo, Beit Shammai says no, and Beis Hillel says yes. Now we can understand why in the Reisha and the Reisha the Seifa, it's only Rabbi Akiva who holds huta kulo. Whereas in the Seifa, even Rabbi Akiva is on board that hutar achno lo hutar kulo, lo hutar rishonim. So now Rabbah could say mukim leila Reisha, the Reisha and the Reisha the Seifa, in a case where Shino Lishono, he changes his language from the original formulation, and he's not Mamid Dvar of Harishonim. And the Reisha, in the case where he says Kodam She'eni Nena Lekulchem, Rabbah's going to explain the Omer now when he finds out that he changes his mind, he's going to say that Ilu Yisi Odea, if I knew I want to take one and be matir one out of the group, I would have said mitchila, konam she'eni nene lozeh v'lozeh. So he's rejecting his original formulation of kulchem. And that's exactly why Rabbi Akiva would hold, according to Rabbah's explanation, like Beis Hillel, that neder shuta miktaso to kulo. And same thing in the Sefer of the Reisha, when he says, konam she'eni nene lo lozeh v'lozeh, Rabbah is going to explain that he's changing his mind, his formulation now. And he says, now that I'm being matir, the Rishon, I'm going to say that ilu ayisi odea, if I knew that I would want to be matir the Rishon, I would have said, konam she'eni nena lekulchem chutz mi ploni. And again, he's changing his original formulation, and therefore Rabbi Akiva holds that neder shuta miktaso huta kula. The Rabbanan hold that even though he is machlif dvar, he changed his original formulation. We don't accept the principle of huta miktaso huta kula because that's Rabbah's shita in Beit Shammai. Now we get to the Seifa, and there we said in the Seifa that if he was matir the neder for Yehuda, the last one on the group, then as far as Reuven, Shimon, and Levi, it is still chal, even according to Rabbi Akiva. So according to Rabbah, we're going to say that this is a case of Mamid Dvar Harishonim. At the beginning, he said Kulchem, and the Omar, now that he's Choser Bo, he is saying the following: if I would have known that I want to be Mata Yehuda from the Neder, I would have said Kodem She'eni Nene Lekulchem, and I would have said Chutz Mi Yehuda. I would have left out Yehuda. So he's not changing his original formulation. And by reconfirming his original formulation, even Rabbi Akiva holds that we don't apply the principle of Huta Miktaso Huta Kula, El Lidi Daf, but according to Rava, that in the case where he's Machlif Devar Harishonim, even Beit Shammai would hold that Huta Miktaso Huta Kula, and the whole Machlokas between Beis Hillel and Beit Shammai is reduced to the issue of Dvar Rishonim or Al Dvar Vachronim, Sof Dvarav, is Bishlema. Reisha. In the case of the Reisha, where he declares Konim Sheni Nena Lekulchem, and then he was Matir one of them, and Rabbi Akiva insists on Huta Kulam. So now you're going to ask me, why did the Rabbanan disagree? According to Rava, even Beit Shammai were on board fundamentally that Huta Miktaso Huta Kula. So where did the Rabbanan of Rabbi Akiva fit in? So the Gemara says we can say Mukim La the Omar lekulchem, that now that he wants to be Mata Yehuda, 1 second, no, I'm talking about the Reisha now, that he wants to be Mata one of the group, or Ruvain of the group, he's saying that if I would have known about that desire on my part to be Mata, I would have said, Kodem Sheni Nena lekulchem, chutz mi ploni. And therefore, in this case, we have the unique shita of Beis Hillel, and Rabbi Akiva accepted that shita of Beis Hillel, and that is Al Gmar Dvarav who nitfas, right? Nitfas Al Gmar Dvarav. So if he's nitfas Al Gmar Dvarav, his Gmar Dvarav was chutz mi ploni. That's what he's saying now, that he would have known, had he known, he would have said chutz mi ploni. And if the emphasis is on chutz mi ploni, that's called machlif dvara. He's saying that the neder is not valid. I don't want a neder on kulchem. The Rabbanan hold, on the other hand, like Beit Shammai. And therefore, al chilas dvara of adam nitfas, and he says kulchem chutz mi ploni, so he's reiterating his original neder. So that's fine as far as the Reish is concerned. Now we're going to go ahead and analyze the Sefer.